The Weeping Woman. Pablo and his friends loved hanging out along the river that flowed by the outskirts of town. They would spend hours over the summer walking alongside it, skipping rocks, and wading in the cool water. This had been perfectly fine until Pablo started staying out later and later. Pablo's grandmother gave him a talking to one evening when he got back just as night was falling. She told him that it wasn't safe to be so near the river at night. She said someone called La Llorona, or the Weeping Woman, would grab him and drag him away into the water. Pablo was 12 years old now, and no longer considered himself to be a little kid. He laughed at the story and told his grandmother not to worry. He didn't believe in such things and could take care of himself. This upset his grandmother, so he told her that he wouldn't go near the river at night, regardless. But Pablo was telling a fib. A few days later, he and his friends were at the river again. They would walk for miles along its shore, using the river to guide themselves back home. They walked much farther than usual, and the sun had already started to set before they even stopped to turn back around. For a brief moment, Pablo thought of his grandmother and her warning. A shiver ran down his spine, but he ignored it. He wasn't a little kid anymore, after all. And so, Pablo pushed the thought out of his mind and kept walking along with the other boys. That is, until out of nowhere a heavy fog rolled in. The group stopped walking at the sight of a thick mist. None of them were sure what was happening. Then, suddenly, a new sound could be heard. A woman crying. The cries were scratchy and strained and sounded far away. Something about it made the hairs on the back of Pablo's neck stand up. One of the older boys in the group called out into the fog ahead, but no one answered. The faint crying continued as if nothing had happened. Not liking this one bit, the group decided it was time to go back toward the town. The sun had since set, and it was getting very dark. The weeping sounded like it was coming from a little further down the river. The boys wanted to get far away from the water, but unfortunately they couldn't, as it was their only way to find their way back home. And so they quickened their pace to a jog. Whoever was wailing seemed to be following, and moving a little bit faster than the group. The sound of the cries seemed to be getting closer. They were louder and more desperate. Pablo strained his eyes as he looked back into the mist and nearly screamed. There was a silhouette in the mist, only a short way behind them. It looked like a woman with long black hair and a tattered white dress, and she was in the middle of a river. At the sight of this, the boys broke into a run. They ran and ran, the cries grew louder and closer, and the figure got bigger and clearer. The screams were almost deafeningly loud when Pablo's heart jumped with hope. The fog seemed to be clearing out ahead. He pointed to it, and the boys ran as fast as they could for it. To their relief, the group burst through the fog, and the wailing stopped. They, look, they looked behind them, and they couldn't see any sign of mist or the silhouette of a howling woman. They had made it nearly to the edge of town. They collapsed in a pile at the bank of a river as they tried to catch their breath. Some of the boys tried to lift the mood by laughing, but Pablo didn't feel like laughing. Something still tugged at the back of his mind. He sat near the chilly shallows of a river and listened to the sounds of the night around him. And that's when he realized something. There were no sounds. A cold chill jolted down Pablo's spine, and he leapt away from the water. At that exact moment, an ear-piercing wail filled the air. He felt a stinging in his arm and looked down to see long, jagged nails cutting into his skin, trying to grab him. But he had leapt away just in time and managed to slip away. The other boy wasn't so lucky. A sickly pale woman with tangled, water-soaked hair and sunken black eyes had wrapped her long, bony arms around him. Her cracked, pale lips pulled back into a skull-like smile. Before any of the others could even react, she had pulled the boy, kicking and screaming, out into the river. They both disappeared into the murky water with one last howl, and it was silent again. The police searched and searched for the poor lost boy. They looked up and down and even dragged a net through the murky waters, but they never did find him. On the official report, it was listed as a drowning, but the boys knew better. Pablo never, ever went back to the river at night.